Minji stood outside the ICU, her worn shoes clicking against sterile tiles. Inside, her cousin Jae-Won lay motionless, machines breathing for him after the car accident that shattered his spine 3 months ago. His grandmother, the formidable chairwoman Kang, approached with measured steps, her Chanel suit immaculate despite the hospital setting. "You need money for your mother's surgery," the old woman stated, not asked. Minji's trembling hands confirmed everything. 50 million won. Immediately available. Minji's breath caught. That amount could save her mother's life, pay off their crushing debts, give her younger brother a chance at university. But nothing came free from the Kang family. "Marry Jae-Won," Chairwoman Kang continued, producing documents from her leather bag. "The wedding happens tomorrow. He needs a wife to secure his inheritance before the board meeting next week. You need money. Simple transaction." Minji glanced through the glass at her unconscious cousin. They'd played together as children before her father's business collapsed and the family connections severed like cut threads. Now he was merely a name in gossip columns, ruthless CEO, corporate shark, untouchable bachelor. "He's in a coma," Minji whispered. "Which makes him the perfect husband for someone in your position," the chairwoman replied coldly. "He won't make demands. You'll have your money. When he wakes, if he wakes, we'll handle an annulment quietly. You'll sign a prenuptial agreement naturally." Minji thought of her mother's pale face, the unpaid hospital bills stacking like tombstones, her brother's acceptance letter to Seoul National University gathering dust. "I'll do it," she heard herself say. The chairwoman smiled, an expression that contained no warmth, only satisfaction. The hospital chapel felt suffocating despite its modest size. No guests attended except Chairwoman Kang, her lawyer, and 2 nurses serving as witnesses. Minji wore a simple white dress purchased that morning from a discount store, her hands clutching a small bouquet of convenience store carnations. Jae-Won lay in the hospital bed positioned before the altar, his face peaceful in unconsciousness, strikingly handsome even in this reduced state. Tubes and wires connected him to various machines that beeped in hollow rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat for a ceremony without heart. The officiant, clearly uncomfortable, rushed through the vows. Minji repeated words that felt like stones in her mouth, promising to honor and cherish a man who couldn't hear her, couldn't choose her, couldn't refuse her. "You may kiss the groom," the officiant said weakly. Minji hesitated, then leaned down and pressed her lips briefly against Jae-Won's forehead. His skin felt warm, alive despite his stillness. For a strange moment, she imagined his eyes opening, imagined him asking what she was doing, imagined this nightmare ending. Instead, the machines continued their methodical beeping. She signed the marriage certificate with shaking hands. The chairwoman's lawyer immediately produced the prenuptial agreement, pages of legal text that essentially stated Minji had no claim to Jae-Won's fortune beyond the agreed 50 million won. She signed without reading. "The money will be transferred within the hour," Chairwoman Kang announced. "You'll move into Jae-Won's penthouse tomorrow. Appearances matter. His assistant will provide you with appropriate clothing and credit cards for necessary expenses. Remember, you're a Kang now. Behave accordingly." Minji nodded, unable to speak, wondering what she'd truly sold for her family's survival. Jae-Won's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the Kang Tower, 60 stories above Seoul's glittering skyline. Minji stood in the marble foyer, her single suitcase pathetically small against the vast emptiness of wealth. His assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Park, guided her through rooms that felt more like museum exhibits than living spaces. Everything was monochrome elegance, black leather, white walls, chrome fixtures. No photographs, no personal touches, nothing suggesting a human actually lived here. "Mr. Kang rarely spent time here," Ms. Park explained, opening the master bedroom. "He practically lived at the office. You'll sleep here now. The staff will arrive at 7 each morning. A stylist will come tomorrow to update your wardrobe. Chairwoman Kang insists you look the part at public events. Public events. Minji hadn't considered that aspect. She'd imagined hiding in this apartment, invisible, until Jae-Won either woke or died and she could disappear back into obscurity. What public events? She asked quietly. The Kang Foundation Gala next week. Several board dinners. You're Mrs. Kang now. People will expect to see you. After Ms. Park departed, Minji wandered through the apartment, touching surfaces that felt cold despite their luxury. She found Jae-Won's study, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. His desk was eerily neat, computer dark, chair positioned as if waiting for his return. She sat in that chair, feeling like an imposter in someone else's life. Her phone buzzed, a message from her brother. The surgery was scheduled. Her mother would live. Minji pressed her forehead against the cool glass window and cried, not knowing if these were tears of relief or grief. 3 weeks into her surreal marriage, Minji received the call at 2 a.m. Jae-Won had opened his eyes. She arrived at the hospital still wearing pajamas, her heart hammering with emotions she couldn't name. Chairwoman Kang was already there, her expression unreadable. The doctors spoke in excited, cautious terms. Neurological function appeared intact, but they needed more tests, more time. "Does he remember anything?" Minji asked. "We haven't asked him yet," the neurologist replied. "He's disoriented, weak. We're limiting stimulation." Chairwoman Kang turned to Minji with calculating eyes. "You'll be the first person he sees when he's ready for visitors. Play your role convincingly. He cannot know the truth about this arrangement, not yet. The board meeting is in 4 days. If they discover this marriage was a convenience, they'll challenge everything." Minji nodded, her stomach twisting. 2 hours later, they allowed her into his room. Jae-Won lay propped up slightly, his eyes open but unfocused. When his gaze landed on her, she saw no recognition, only confusion. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice rough from weeks of intubation. Minji's throat closed. She was supposed to lie, to pretend, to play the devoted wife. But looking at his vulnerable state, at the man who'd become her husband without choice, she found herself frozen. "I'm Minji," she finally managed. "We're cousins. We grew up together, remember?" Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps a distant memory of childhood summers. "Why are you here?" he asked. "Because," she said softly, the partial truth easier than complete deception, "your family." He studied her face as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle, then his eyes drifted closed, exhaustion claiming him once more. Jae-Won's recovery progressed rapidly, his sharp mind returning faster than his physical strength. The doctors called it miraculous. Minji called it terrifying. She visited daily, maintaining the careful fiction that she was simply a concerned cousin. But Chairwoman Kang's deadline loomed, the board meeting where Jae-Won's marital status would determine control of Kang Industries. They needed to tell him, to convince him to maintain the charade. On the 5th day after his awakening, Chairwoman Kang gathered them in Jae-Won's private hospital suite. He sat in a wheelchair, looking gaunt but alert, his eyes sharp as broken glass. "You're married," the chairwoman announced without preamble, producing the marriage certificate. "To Minji. The ceremony occurred while you were unconscious, but it's legally binding. The board requires a married CEO. You needed a wife. She needed money for her mother's medical care. A mutually beneficial arrangement." Minji watched Jae-Won's expression transform from confusion to anger to something colder, more controlled. He looked at the certificate, then at her, his gaze dissecting her like a business proposal. "You married me for money while I was in a coma," he said flatly. "I married you to save my mother's life," Minji corrected, meeting his eyes despite her fear. "Your grandmother offered a solution to both our problems. I never wanted to deceive you." "How noble," he replied, bitter sarcasm coating each word. And now? What's the plan? Chairwoman Kang leaned forward. You maintain this marriage through the board meeting and the merger negotiations. After that, you can divorce quietly if you wish. But for now, you need her, Jae-Won. The board won't accept an unmarried CEO, not with the old guard looking for any excuse to vote you out. He stared at Min-ji for a long moment, and she saw the calculation happening behind his eyes, the same ruthless assessment that made him legendary in business. Fine, he said finally. We'll play this game, but there will be rules. Jae-Won returned to the penthouse 1 week later, moving slowly with a cane, his pride clearly wounded by his physical limitations. Min-ji had been living there alone, and now the space felt impossibly small despite its vast square footage. He called her to his study that first evening, where he'd positioned himself behind his desk like a CEO conducting a merger negotiation. Perhaps that's exactly what this was. Ground rules, he began without greeting. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. You'll attend required social functions as my wife. You'll maintain appropriate appearances in public. In private, we maintain separate lives. I'll provide you with a generous monthly allowance beyond the agreed sum. You'll sign a more comprehensive prenuptial agreement my lawyers are preparing. Min-ji listened, standing before his desk like an employee being briefed on job responsibilities. I won't pretend to love you, he continued coldly. I won't pretend this is anything other than what it is, a transaction forced upon both of us by circumstance and my grandmother's manipulation. But I will expect loyalty and discretion. The media will be watching. Any scandal, any hint that this marriage is false, and I'll ensure you regret it, understood? Understood, Min-ji replied quietly. May I establish some rules of my own? His eyebrow raised, surprised. Speak. I won't be treated like property. I married you to save my family, but I won't be your servant or your decoration. I deserve basic respect and consideration. I'll play my role publicly, but privately you'll treat me as an equal human being, not a purchased commodity. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Perhaps respect. Perhaps merely surprise that she'd pushed back. Agreed, he said finally. One more thing. You'll sleep in the guest room. I require privacy. Min-ji nodded and left, her hands shaking only after she'd closed the door behind her. The Kang Foundation gala arrived like an approaching storm. Min-ji stood before her mirror, transformed by professional stylists into someone she didn't recognize. The emerald gown hugged her frame elegantly. Diamonds glittered at her throat, borrowed from the Kang family vault, and her hair was swept into an intricate updo. Jae-Won appeared in her doorway, moving without his cane now, though she could see the effort it cost him. He wore a tailored tuxedo that emphasized his lean frame, his recovery making him appear almost ethereal, dangerous in his fragility. You look acceptable, he said, which she'd learned was his version of a compliment. You look like you should still be in the hospital, she replied. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. Noted and ignored. Shall we? The gala took place in the grand ballroom of Seoul's most prestigious hotel. Cameras flashed as they entered, Jae-Won's hand firm on her back, guiding her through the crowd with practiced ease, despite his weakened state. Everyone stared. The mysterious cousin who'd married the unconscious CEO, the Cinderella story the media couldn't quite believe. Smile, Jae-Won murmured in her ear. You're supposed to be madly in love with your handsome husband. I'm supposed to be convincingly married, she whispered back. Love was never part of our contract. Semantics matter less than appearances. They navigated the evening together, a choreographed performance of marital unity. Jae-Won introduced her to business associates, board members, competitors. She smiled, made polite conversation, played her role flawlessly while feeling like a fraud beneath the expensive dress. Late in the evening, Chairwoman Kang approached them, satisfaction evident in her expression. Well done. she said quietly. The board is convinced. You've bought yourselves time. Minji wondered what they were buying time for. A real marriage that would never exist, or simply delaying an inevitable ending. Living with Jae-Won proved more complicated than Minji had anticipated. He worked obsessively, often until 3 in the morning, his study light casting shadows through the penthouse. She heard him moving through the apartment at odd hours, his footsteps careful but audible. One night, 3 weeks after the gala, she found him collapsed on the study floor, his body trembling with exhaustion and pain. The doctors had warned about pushing too hard during recovery, but Jae-Won seemed determined to prove his weakness hadn't diminished him. Let me help you, Minji said, kneeling beside him. I don't need help, he gritted out, trying to push himself up and failing. Your pride isn't worth another hospital stay. Stop being stubborn. She helped him to the sofa, her smaller frame surprisingly strong. He allowed it, perhaps too exhausted to fight. She retrieved his pain medication and water, then sat in the chair across from him, waiting until his breathing steadied. Why do you push yourself like this? She asked quietly. Because showing weakness gets you destroyed in business, he replied, his usual coldness slightly diminished by pain and fatigue. The board is looking for any excuse to remove me. Being the CEO who married his cousin while unconscious already makes me vulnerable. I can't afford to also be the CEO who can't work full days. You're recovering from a serious injury. Anyone would understand that. He laughed bitterly. You don't understand corporate warfare, Minji. Understanding is irrelevant. Perception is everything. Weakness is death. She studied him. This man who'd become her husband through such strange circumstances, who maintained walls so high she couldn't imagine what existed behind them. You're not weak, she said softly. You survived when you shouldn't have. That's strength. Something in his expression shifted, surprise breaking through his careful control, but he said nothing. After a moment, his eyes closed, exhaustion finally claiming him. Minji stayed, watching over him until dawn. The board meeting arrived with the weight of an execution. Minji attended as Jae-Won's wife, sitting in the observation section while men in expensive suits discussed her husband's future as if he were a commodity to be traded. Director Hwang, a silver-haired man with calculating eyes, led the opposition. Mr. Kang's convenient marriage raises questions about his judgment. Perhaps his recent trauma has affected his decision-making capabilities. I move for a comprehensive medical evaluation before confirming his continued leadership. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Minji watched Jae-Won's expression remain perfectly neutral, though she'd learned to read the tension in his shoulders. My marriage is irrelevant to my business capabilities, Jae-Won stated coldly. Unless this board believes choosing a life partner somehow diminishes one's ability to run a corporation. Your life partner is your cousin, Director Hwang pressed. A woman with no social standing, no business connections, no apparent qualifications beyond convenient timing. It appears opportunistic at best, desperate at worst. Before Jae-Won could respond, Chairwoman Kang stood, her presence commanding immediate silence. You question my grandson's judgment, Director Hwang. Her voice could have frozen oceans. Perhaps we should discuss your judgment in the failed merger with Daewon Industries last quarter. Or shall we examine your nephew's employment in procurement despite his questionable qualifications? Director Hwang paled. The room's atmosphere shifted. Jae-Won has led this company to record profits for 3 consecutive years, the chairwoman continued. His personal life is his own. This board exists to oversee business operations, not to play matchmaker or moral authority. Unless someone wishes to challenge my assessment? Silence answered her. The vote proceeded. Jae-Won retained his position by a narrow but sufficient margin. Afterward, in the elevator descending from the boardroom, Jae-Won finally exhaled. Thank you, Minji said quietly. though she wasn't entirely sure who she was thanking, him for enduring this or fate for the narrow victory. "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "This war is far from over." Something shifted after the board meeting. Jae-Won began emerging from his study occasionally, joining Min-ji for late dinners when his work finally released him. They didn't speak much. Conversations remained surface level, carefully neutral, but the silence between them felt less hostile. One evening, Min-ji prepared kimchi jjigae, the spicy stew her mother used to make. She hadn't intended for Jae-Won to join her, but he appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the familiar scent. "I remember this," he said, surprising her. "Your mother made it when we were children, after my parents died, before my grandmother took me away." Min-ji paused, wooden spoon in hand. They never discussed their shared past, the brief overlap of their childhoods before wealth and poverty had separated their families completely. "She still makes it," Min-ji said quietly. "Or she did, before the illness. She's recovering well now, thanks to—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Thanks to our arrangement," Jae-Won completed. "You can say it, Min-ji. We both know why we're here." He sat at the counter, watching her cook with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Do you regret it?" she asked impulsively. "The marriage, I mean. If you could go back, knowing what would happen, would you have refused?" He considered the question seriously. "I would have refused to get in the car that night, avoided the accident entirely, but given the circumstances as they unfolded, no. My grandmother was right. I needed to be married to secure my position, and you needed money to save your mother. We used each other efficiently. No regret, just pragmatism." "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard," Min-ji said softly. "Why?" "Because we acknowledged reality instead of pretending at romance. Most marriages are transactions anyway, Min-ji. At least we're honest about ours." She served the stew, and they ate in silence, the spicy warmth filling spaces between them that words couldn't reach. Min-ji discovered Jae-Won's nightmare by accident. She'd woken at 3 a.m. for water, heard sounds from his room, gasping, words that might have been pleas or curses. She stood outside his door, uncertain, until a crash sent her rushing inside. He was tangled in sheets, his body rigid, eyes open but unseeing. The nightmare had him completely, dragging him back to the accident that had nearly killed him. "Jae-Won," she said gently, approaching carefully. "Wake up. You're safe. You're home." When her hand touched his shoulder, he startled violently, grabbing her wrist with crushing force. For a moment she saw pure panic in his eyes, something raw and unguarded that his waking self would never reveal. Then recognition returned. He released her immediately, breathing hard. "I'm sorry," he managed. "I thought—" "It's okay," Min-ji said, though her wrist throbbed. "You were dreaming. The accident." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak, his legendary control shattered by unconscious terror. Min-ji sat on the edge of his bed, a boundary they'd never crossed before. "Do they happen often?" "Every night," he admitted quietly. "Since I woke up, I'm back in the car, trapped, feeling everything break. The doctors say it's normal, part of trauma recovery, but it doesn't feel normal. It feels like I'm dying repeatedly." Without thinking, Min-ji reached for his hand. He stiffened but didn't pull away. "You're not dying," she said firmly. "You're here. You're healing. Your mind is processing what your body survived. It will get better." "You sound very certain for someone who's never experienced it. My father died when I was 14, car accident like yours. For months, I dreamed about it, imagined different scenarios where he survived. The nightmares eventually faded, but the missing never does." Jae-Won squeezed her hand slightly, the gesture barely perceptible but there. They sat in the darkness together, two people bound by convenience discovering something that might have been the beginning of understanding. The tabloid appeared on a Tuesday morning. its headlines screaming across social media: Kang heirs secret marriage, desperate cousin traps unconscious billionaire. Min-ji saw it first, her phone exploding with notifications. Someone had leaked details: the hospital ceremony, the money transfer, the prenuptial agreement. Everything they'd tried to keep private was now public spectacle. Jae-Won's reaction was controlled fury. He made calls, threatened lawsuits, deployed lawyers like weapons. But the damage was done. The story had already spread, mutating with each retelling until truth and fiction were indistinguishable. "This will destroy everything," Min-ji said numbly, watching her phone continue its relentless buzzing. Messages from reporters, former classmates, people she'd never met demanding her story. "Not if we control the narrative," Jae-Won replied, his strategic mind already working. "We need to appear united, unbothered. We'll give an exclusive interview, tell our version of events." "Our version? You mean we lie?" "I mean we emphasize certain truths while omitting others. Yes, we married while I was unconscious. Yes, your family needed money. But we also have a history. We're cousins who knew each other as children. We can frame this as two families coming together in crisis, turning tragedy into something beautiful." Min-ji stared at him. "You want to pretend this is a love story? I want to survive this media frenzy without losing my company or destroying both our reputations. If that requires selling a romance, then yes, that's exactly what we'll do." The interview was scheduled for Friday. 3 days to prepare their fiction, to build a narrative that would satisfy public curiosity while protecting their truth. Jae-Won hired a media coach who taught them to gaze at each other convincingly, to touch with apparent affection, to lie fluently about feelings that didn't exist. But during one practice session, when Jae-Won's hand cupped Min-ji's face in a gesture their coach had choreographed, something unexpected happened. She forgot to pretend. The interview aired nationally, Min-ji and Jae-Won seated together on an elegant sofa, their hands clasped with practiced ease. The interviewer, a sharply professional woman named Ms. Lee, smiled with professional sympathy. "Let's address the rumors directly," she began. "Some call your marriage opportunistic. How do you respond?" Jae-Won's hand tightened slightly on Min-ji's, a signal they'd rehearsed, her cue to speak first. "Love rarely follows conventional timelines," Min-ji said, the words they'd practiced flowing smoothly. "Jae-Won and I knew each other as children. When I heard about his accident, I went to the hospital every day. His grandmother saw what I felt before I'd fully acknowledged it myself. The ceremony happened unconventionally, yes, but the feelings were real. And you, Mr. Kang, how did you react when you learned you'd married your cousin while unconscious?" Jae-Won's expression softened. An impressive performance. "I was surprised, certainly. But looking at Min-ji, remembering her dedication during my recovery, I realized my grandmother had given me an unexpected gift. Sometimes the heart knows what the conscious mind hasn't yet discovered." It was beautiful fiction, delivered flawlessly. Min-ji almost believed it herself. The interviewer pressed about the money, about the prenuptial agreement, about the convenient timing. They deflected smoothly, reframing each accusation as misunderstood circumstance until the narrative shifted. By interview's end, social media sentiment was changing. The skeptics remained, but many now saw their story as romantic rather than mercenary, a modern fairy tale of love emerging from tragedy. Walking back to their car afterward, still holding hands for the cameras, Jae-Won murmured, "Well done. You're a better actress than I expected." "So are you," Min-ji replied. But her heart felt strange, as if the performance had revealed something true beneath the fiction. That night, neither of them could sleep. They found each other in the kitchen at midnight, both seeking solace they couldn't name. 6 months after their wedding, Min-ji stood in Jae-Won's study, where this strange arrangement had begun. The prenuptial agreement lay on his desk. He'd asked her to come, said they needed to discuss their future. "The board is satisfied," he began without preamble. "The public believes our story. Your mother is healthy. We've fulfilled the terms of our arrangement. I'm prepared to file for divorce, if that's what you want." Minji's breath caught. She'd known this moment would come, had anticipated it, even prepared for it. But now that it arrived, something inside her resisted. "Is that what you want?" she asked. Jae-Won stood, moving to the window that overlooked Seoul's glittering skyline. "I want to be honest with you, Minji. These past months, you've become more than a convenient wife. You've been patient with my nightmares, supportive during board battles, genuine in ways I didn't expect. I find myself reluctant to end this." Her pulse quickened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, perhaps we could try making this real. Not a business arrangement or a performance, but an actual marriage. I'm not offering romance. I don't know if I'm capable of that anymore. But I'm offering partnership, respect, genuine companionship, if you're willing." Minji approached him slowly, her heart thundering. For months she'd told herself this was temporary, that she was simply playing a role. But standing beside him now, she recognized the truth she'd been avoiding. "I'm willing," she said quietly. "But I need honesty, Jae-Won. No more performances, no more calculated distance. If we're doing this, we do it as equals who choose each other, not strangers forced together by circumstance." He turned to face her fully, and for the first time since waking from his coma, she saw his walls completely lowered. "Agreed," he said, and reached for her hand, not for cameras or appearances, but for them alone. Outside, Seoul glittered with possibility. Inside, two people who'd married as strangers began the harder work of becoming partners, discovering that sometimes the most unexpected arrangements lead to the most genuine connections. Their story had started with vows spoken to an unconscious man, but this moment, this choice, felt like the real beginning.